Hello everybody, and welcome back to Mission MCU, where we discuss everything within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I am your host Ryan, and today I will be breaking down and going over the details of the next film in our chronological timeline, The Incredible Hulk. Before I get started, I want to thank all of you listeners for the positive feedback and support you've given us since the podcast launched. I also want to give a shout out to Brené McCullough, the host of the Best Season podcast. She has reached out multiple times expressing her support for Mission MCU, and I want to take a moment to reciprocate the appreciation. On her podcast, Brené talks about the various stages and seasons we all go through in life and shares her thoughts, feelings, and experiences to help others come out happier and better than ever before. Please check out her podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many other platforms. Again, that's The Best Season, hosted by Brené McCullough. Alright everybody, so let's dive into The Incredible Hulk. So just to do a little recap, we're coming off Iron Man 2, where we again follow Tony Stark, and he kind of uncovers the legacy of his father and the past dealings between him and then Anton Vanko, where he now has to face off against his son, Ivan Vanko. But again, there's many things we learn about Tony. At the time that we see him, he's dying of palladium poisoning. He uses all these elements from his father's past, the legacy, to not only cure his poisoning, but then also end up defeating the villain, the antagonist of the story, Ivan, where now we also have some other elements coming into play, as well as additional characters of S.H.I.E.L.D., Black Widow, Nick Fury had more of screen time. We got War Machine and his buddy Rhodey, so a lot of elements coming into the MCU timeline from Iron Man 2. But segueing into Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2 serves as the first movie in what is called Fury's Big Week. So we're diving into the Incredible Hulk, which is the second installment of Fury's Big Week. Fury's Big Week being Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, and then Thor, all occurring within the same week. So everything's going down at once, the culmination building up to the Avengers here in a couple episodes. Starting with The Incredible Hulk, let's just take a big picture look to start off. So just beginning, Incredible Hulk is not really a widely enjoyed movie by the public. There's just a lot of things going on in this movie that I think just leave a bad taste in people's mouths. Many don't really even count it as part of the MCU now because of more recent events, especially, aside from the film. I strongly disagree with that. There are things within the film that I think tie it into the MCU timeline in itself. And I'm not even talking about the end credit scene that I will get to later, but there are things that I don't know if I will discuss on this episode involving future installments. I might leave that to Matt, but there are a couple movies. There's one in particular movie that's coming out, I think, next year. Captain America New World Order, that will be bringing characters back. So in phase 4, there have been characters like Abomination that you saw in this movie that do come back in forms of fashion. I'm not going to go into detail, but they do return. So there are stronger links than initially perceived to this movie. So I must disagree with everybody out there if say that this is not in the MCU. Sorry, I disagree. This does have ties. But as I will say, just like Captain Marvel, I can't help but do have an increased appreciation for this movie, especially as I was sitting down and kind of paying closer attention, paying attention to more details, kind of getting a better connection with the characters. I do have more of appreciation, but I cannot say that it really moves up the ranks for me like Captain Marvel did. This kind of is one of my lesser liked movies. I enjoy it. I will recommend it to anybody, but just ranking, there are definitely a lot of films within the MCU that I feel are better. There were things like the impact of scenes. I kind of felt I had to really concentrate and try to relate to the characters a lot more. There were scenes that really did stick out to me because the overall kind of thought process going into this film, that it's kind of stale. It lacks more emotion. There is a relationship formed here between Elizabeth and Bruce, but it's kind of hard to feel it as you're going through the film, right? You can understand their situation and what they've gone through, but you can only kind of interpret what happened in their past. You can only see what's in the present. You get flashbacks of what happened in their past, so you kind of feel the weight of the situation with everything going on. But with taking everything at face value, it's kind of hard to dive into that relationship and really kind of step into their shoes and feel what's going on. And like I said, it kind of feels a little stale, and I can understand that from other people's perspectives for sure. But there were scenes that I felt more of an impact with, especially like, for example, when Bruce comes back to the United States and he's trying to track down Elizabeth and he's staying in that pizza shop, right? And he's going to leave. Elizabeth is there with her now, I believe, current boyfriend. And she notices him, right? He flees out the back and he's hiding behind the dumpster. You know, she comes out into the rain and is looking for him. And you can see the pain in her eyes, you know, and obviously then you see the anguish on Bruce's face, because although he wants to be with her and find her as much as he can, he can't. You know, he's trying to make the right decision and not hurt her inadvertently. So he tries his best to stay away so she doesn't get caught in the crossfire of anything that's going on with him, right? So I do feel scenes like that for sure as I watched through this time. But on the surface level, yeah, still a little, it doesn't hit home. It doesn't change the whole perspective of the movie for me. Things I'm not really fond of, you know, there were things I picked out, not really fond of, like at the beginning, starting off with the film, going through the flashbacks, through the beginning credits, right? Like, I feel they could have done a lot better job of actually playing that out to be the pure beginning of the film, because I feel like you understand, you can gain an understanding of what happened and then why it's led into what's going on in the main story of the movie. However, I feel, again, trying to connect with characters and get that emotional standpoint and understanding, I feel if you play that out at the beginning of the movie, you might feel the weight and the repercussions of those scenes of him first turning into the Hulk, injuring Elizabeth, injuring Thaddeus Ross, and gain an understanding more than just having it in flashback form. And you can feel the weight of and the impact of what goes on through the rest of the film. So still staying at the beginning of the film, like I do like how the beginning of the movie, when Banner is in Brazil, you know, how it sets up the mystery of Dr. Blue, shows us how strong Bruce's efforts are to keep the Hulk contained, so he can keep people, especially Elizabeth, safe. He doesn't want to come home and then run the risk of that, right? So I do like the mystery component with that, so it's something to kind of always keep in the back of your head during the film and look forward to. So I like that little precedent started at the beginning of the film, and then, you know, there was a progression actually for Bruce Banner. So as talking with friends and other individuals who've watched the movie, you know, one thing that always gets brought up is Bruce just doesn't have any character development, right? It's just this whole time him trying to keep the Hulk contained, and then there's just episodes where he can't anymore, you know, Hulk breaks free, right? So then you see the repercussions of that, and then it just goes back to Bruce. Again, on the surface level, I can definitely see where that is the takeaway from it, but trying to get more ingrained in the character, he does have a progression. I don't believe they displayed it well and brought to the forefront enough, like I said, but there is something there. It's a complete opposite of Iron Man. Just, you know, Tony was at his worst in the beginning when they made the transition to the best possible, he made the transition to the best possible person that he could, right? So in the beginning of Iron Man, he's this person, like I've said before, he's this person that has it all. He disregards his relationships. You know, he's very frivolous. He has it all. But then he goes through this life-changing event and he comes out the better person at the end. Where in contrast to Bruce Banner, at the beginning of the film, he is trying to be the best person he can to contain the Hulk, right? So he's trying to be the best person he can be, but then what he comes to learn is, in order to harness this power and coincide with it and coexist with it, he needs to learn how to control it, but then in order to unleash it, not to contain it. So he learns that he needs to bring out the worst in himself in order to be the best quote unquote person he can be. So in contrast to Tony, just wanted to throw that little tidbit in there. And something, just a little minor detail I did notice as we're going through the film, obviously the color scheme of the film, right? Obviously the Hulk, big and green. It was definitely brought into focus. I notice it more now as I watch through, you know, a lot. It was going on a lot throughout the film. It's like a representation. I felt it was a representation of like the Hulk always lurking in the background, always being there, no matter how much Banner tried to contain him. He was always there kind of lurking behind Bruce's eyes, like waiting for that opportunity to arise. So here's a little tidbit of going into the connection where I feel it made a connection with the MCU, even though it wasn't apparent or at the forefront. You kind of had to dive into it a little bit. But what I did appreciate was the connection and attempted revival of the super soldier program that Dr. Erskine from Captain America, the First Avenger, you know, he made famous, you know, when creating Captain America. right? So it's interesting that Captain America was released actually years later than this film. Incredible Hulk, I believe, came out in 2008. It was the second film in release order after Iron Man, and then Captain America, the First Avenger, I believe did not come out until 2011, if I'm correct on that. So it's interesting to see that they made reference to this in this film 3 years prior. Now, I'm sure that there was some production going on for Captain America at that time, but again, this was a time when the MCU was in its infancy, right? They didn't surely know where it was going to go from here, so there was definitely still time to play around with it and everything. I love them intricating that detail into this storyline. I did enjoy the continuity of the concept that the serum amplifies the character within and then manifests it externally, right? That's a continuation from Captain America, the First Avenger, where you saw the comparison of Captain America, Steve Rogers, it amplifies the good in him, where we saw it amplified the bad in Johann Schmidt, Red Skull, right? So I love that continuation of this too. So you see it, you don't really see it in Bruce and the Hulk, really. That was just kind of like a rare gamma manifestation, but then you see it with Emil Blonsky, right? So he has that taste of that serum, right? What happens the rest of the film? He wants more. He is now thirsty for that power that the Hulk has. He just wants to put himself up against the Hulk to test his skills. He always wants to strive for that challenge. So getting the serum, boom, amplifies that tenfold. And then lastly, before we start diving into the individual characters and everything there, when it came to the Hulk, I understand the depiction of the Hulk when he first appears, at the beginning of the movie in the factory scene, right? When he first appears, when they hide him, he's more of like a shadowy figure, right? They're trying to conceal him. He's more of a mystery. It's this big, giant, more of a horror movie type vibe. When he first appears, he's kept in the shadows. It very much contrasts with the rest of the movies in the MCU where he's depicted as the big green hero, right? He's still this angry beast, so to speak, especially when we see him again in the Avengers, but he has more of a mellow vibe. He's not as dark, not as horror movie vibe going on there, but he's more depicted as this angry beast, but a controllable, focused power, right? So, first character I want to dive into is obviously Bruce Banner, Hulk. So again, I liked him having to rely on the worst part of himself to win in the end after attempting to be the best version of himself at the beginning of the film. We see that in the final scene where he's meditating, right? So we see him at the end, we see his eyes lit up green. He's now repurposed his focus to controlling the Hulk, coinciding with it, coexisting with the Hulk, right? So during the impactful scenes, I was able to hone in more on the anguish and pain he felt towards trying to keep Elizabeth safe and be the best person he can be while keeping the Hulk contained, throughout the most of the film, right? So there was kind of that connection, based off what happened, especially from the flashback scenes at the beginning, it had to be forced to kind of put myself in his shoes since you weren't able to see the scene for what it was and feel the emotion behind their voice or, see it in their eyes and their expressions. But there is some connection there where it's man, it's been 5 years. I think 5 years since he was on the run since that incident. There's got to be a lot going on in his mind. There's got to be a lot of emotion involved there that throughout this whole time, he's still thinking of Elizabeth. He's still focusing on controlling this outburst of power that can come out at any moment if he lets it slip and get away from him, right? So I can feel forced, but I can still make that connection with him as far as the anguish and the pain he must feel going through this whole time. I felt Edward Norton was a little too serious with the role as we go through. I saw little stints of him trying to be comedic. The one that sticks out to me is when they are in the cab. They go to get the cab in the city, and he's flying through traffic, and they're like, oh yeah, what could be worse? That getting a cab, it's not going to raise his heart rate all that much. And then they're flying through the city, he's dodging cars by inches, right? And his heart rate's going up, and they get out of the cab, and then Elizabeth yells at him you are crazy, right? So he makes that tries to make that comedic, that joke that says I have some techniques to help with your breathing, but I understood it. I kind of chuckled a little bit, but it didn't really hit home all that much. I think they were pushed attempts. They were just forced attempts at the comedy in this, sometimes, especially from Edward Norton. I like Edward Norton wholeheartedly, love him in a lot of other films. I just felt this one, it was kind of hard to connect with the comedy from him, especially throughout this. Even though, like I said, the Hulk was more of the horror film vibe, more of that shadowy figure, especially at the beginning, and then it was kind of like a scary, quote unquote, scary kind of sensation when he did emerge, and it was more of a, what the hell's gonna happen? What kind of destruction is he gonna cause and go on this rampage of uncontrollable rage, right? Instead of, like I said, where he's depicted more as a controlled and focused Hulk, more focused power towards the enemy. It's not just burst out and anybody who catches it. There is an exception in Age of Ultron, which we will get to, but there's reasoning behind why he did that. And a little bit of it in the Avengers, which I will also cover when we get to that movie. But moving forward, for the majority of the MCU, he is more contained as the Hulk and more focused. So I did actually like that more aggressive and violent depiction of him, right? Which represents the worst part of Bruce as well. So I actually did like it in this movie. Not saying I prefer it to the Hulk that's depicted throughout the rest of the MCU, but I did like the differentiation. So I could kind of, pick it apart and kind of relate to both sides in a way, right? So I did like the veracity during the action and battle scenes, right? I enjoyed the Hulk's caring nature also for Elizabeth, so keeping that trend. We'll see that come back with various characters going forward, so keep that in the back of your mind especially. He's definitely expressing that softer side behind the brutal exterior. We see that concept again resurface through various films in the MCU. And then one last thing with the Hulk. It was interesting, but he does talk and refer to himself at the end of the movie when he says Hulk smash and slams his fist in the ground. It sets up that trend that he refers to himself as Hulk and never as Bruce Banner. We see that in various movies where it is a negative impact when people refer to him as Banner instead of Hulk when he's in Hulk form. So it's interesting to also keep that in the back of your mind that he did it here to himself. Hulk did to himself. He acknowledges he's an independent entity separate from Bruce, right? So we will see this in later installments as well throughout the MCU. So a lot of key factors here with the character of Hulk specifically that the producers and production team of the MCU actually keep consistent throughout these films. So I love it. Now, diving into Elizabeth here, unfortunately, there's not a lot I can say. I did mention that I really stepped into her shoes a little bit in certain scenes, right? When she sees him at the pizza shops trying to find him, there is pain, there's anguish. I haven't seen you in 5 years. Her long-lasting love that's still there for Bruce. Yes, I can definitely feel those scenes, absolutely. But ultimately, holistically, I can't really get a feel for her character as much as I can in other films, especially the ones that we've covered already. I don't feel I need to really dig deep into her character here. Aside from those few sentimental scenes, right? There's not much I can say about her contribution to the plot in the film really overall. I just didn't feel like, aside from really, I acknowledge that she's a very important piece, I will say, of displaying that Hulk's not just this unrelenting rage, that he does have this softer side, right? Once he saves her and takes her to that cave and everything, he is very protective of her. She serves as this means of calming him down, relating to him a little bit, seeing that softer side. I get that. That is very important. But really, aside from that, I really had to do a lot of digging to try and find anything else. So really, she had much of an impact in this film. But that does not go without saying, at the time of this recording, I have absolutely read rumors in Captain America New World Order, coming out, I believe, like I said, next year, Elizabeth Ross actually returns. We have not seen her in the MCU since this film. However, I'm actually very excited to see her reprise her role as Elizabeth Ross again, to see where there may be some differentiation in her character from this film into that one. So I didn't feel a lot of connection with her this film. I want to see where things change coming up in that film that I'm sure we'll cover with Matt when the time comes. Now let's dive into the antagonists of the film, right? Starting with Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, and then we'll get to Emil Blonsky. So I liked the plot that obviously Ross had made prior efforts to recreate the super soldier serum program. It explains the motivation to attempt it with Bruce and then find and detain him after the experiment went awry. This experiment went totally upside down. Now it's on his ass to try to get Bruce back, right? So it makes sense. It makes a very important connection on why he's doing this, the motivation for him going after him this whole time. So I do like that aspect of Thaddeus there. Even though it is a very what the hell moment when Stanley, ingests the drop of Bruce's blood in the beverage, and had gamma radiation poisoning. It leads Ross to track down the bottle back to Bruce. So that's a little interesting connection there that I like. It exhibits his obsession with finding Bruce and recreating the super soldier program as a whole, right? So even though this experiment went wrong with Bruce, he's not done. He still wants to continue it. He wants any kind of reason or excuse to try to keep this going because he feels he can be successful. And as soon as Emil Blonsky gives him that opportunity, he runs with it, right? Like I just said, that sets up Blonsky's desire to seek out challenge and a desire to fight. So understanding that how the serum affects him negatively, it's easy now to make that connection between Blonsky and Ross, as Blonsky's now kind of on the tail end of his military career. Ross even makes a comment about it, like, how old are you? Like, if you wanted, you could just retire, become a general. And Emil's like, nah, I'm in the field, I want to challenge myself. I want to be in combat. He always has that thirst for the challenge. So as soon as he gets his hands on the serum and gets a taste of it, it is just magnified. And after just even getting a whiff that his physicality can be amplified, Blonsky desires to take on the assignment. He manipulates Ross to give him the serum on him due to his hunger for the fighting. So, after receiving the serum, we can see how it positively and negatively affects Blonsky. He's bigger, faster, stronger, more agile, able to recover from fatal injuries quickly. Like, what the heck was that? Even Thaddeus Ross is like, oh, this man's dead, just let me know when he passes. However long later, some guy comes back and reports, hey, it's Blonsky. You might want to see this, and he's just completely healed. Like, what? So we see the effects of this, and Thaddeus runs with that. Like I said before, he runs with it. Oh my gosh, this can be successful. Let's see where we can take this. But this opposite side of that coin, the serum also fuels his hunger for challenge and his lust for more power, where ultimately he becomes the Abomination at the end of the film. Again, before moving on to additional characters, Emil Blonsky, Abomination, for the longest time, had not been seen in the MCU again, but makes a reappearance in Phase 4 moving forward. So again, another instance where Incredible Hulk, they're tying it a little bit more into the MCU now. I think they probably heard the critics. They heard everybody talking that they don't consider this part of the MCU. Well, now they're giving us reasons to connect it. So I do love it moving forward, seeing the connections and where it goes, what's already been established, but where they might further take it down the road as well. So I love that. Now let's get into Dr. Blue, Samuel Stearns, right? The scientist that Bruce had been communicating with while he was down in Brazil. So, the sequence where Stern is administering the antidote was pretty intense, right? So we finally see Dr. Blue. We finally see Samuel Stearns for the first time. Him and Bruce are going back and forth on what's going on, the negatives, the positives, the chance of success with his antidote, his reproduction of Bruce's blood through his testing and his experimentation, and then also mentioning other test subjects. So a lot's going on here behind the scenes that we finally learn about and stumble upon once these two finally get together in the film. The first time watching, I thought Hulk would just be free and kill Stearns during the scene where they were, he was experimenting on him and trying to suppress the Hulk, whatever, the gamma radiation within his blood, right? So I just thought, first time I watched this, I thought Hulk was going to bust out and kill him, right? So it was going along with that violent vibe of the whole film, how Hulk was portrayed in this film. But there was a lot of anticipation to see the results of the test, because it serves as a culmination of what Bruce has been trying so hard to get the chance to do, both on and off screen. In addition to that, the scene where Stearns was showing the increased supply of blood, like I mentioned before, to Bruce and Elizabeth, had much more weight to it this time watching. Because, we know what one drop of blood can do to somebody when ingested. That's how Ross tracked down Bruce in the first place. Think about what could happen if Thaddeus and Blonsky got their hands on this supply. Like, oh my gosh, just the thought of it, that's kind of scary, of what they could try to do with so many test subjects. Nope. No, thank you. You can hear it in Bruce's voice when he was just like, no, destroy it all. Destroy it all. We cannot have any of this. This is dangerous. You do not know what these people are capable of and what their plans are to do with this. Get rid of it now. So And then going into the last scene of Stearns. Oh, this is interesting. So, right, when the last scene when we see of Stearns, when we witness Banner's blood drip into an open wound on his head, and it begins to grow and make this sort of bubbling motion, that scene depicts him turning into somebody who's known as the Leader. He will finally make an appearance as this character in the new Captain America movie, New World Order, coming May of 2024. So that's what? Elizabeth Ross, Samuel Stearns is coming back as the Leader. Who knows if Abomination's going to be in it? I haven't heard any rumor of that, but we got recurring characters, more and more connections made to further MCU installments. I'm very excited to see where they're going to take some of these characters especially after so long. Like I said, this movie was made in 2008. That's a long ways away if you think about it. That's 15 years ago. And now they're bringing these characters back, and this is going to be the second time, well, not Abomination, but Samuel Stearns and Elizabeth Ross. This will be the second time they've been seen in 15 years. I'm so excited to see where they take this, what happens with their character development, what's been going on, where have they been this whole time in 15 years. So many loose ends now kind of being tied up, and maybe their stories will continue in further installments after New World Order, or some might come to a close. Very excited to see what happens here. Alright, now that I've touched upon the overall aspects of the film as well as the characters and development, I just want to provide some ending thoughts to everything. So first off, as far as the progression of the movie, I felt it was okay, but not great. Again, reiterating the beginning flashback scene, right? I feel that was something that we should have been able to see firsthand and feel the consequence and feel the impact of this traumatic event, especially between the relationship of Bruce and Elizabeth. So then later down the road in the movie, we felt them reuniting a little bit more impactful. I felt like we kind of understood Bruce's, from diving into the character a little bit at the beginning when he's in Brazil, and you can see how hard he's attempting to try and conceal the Hulk. I feel that we start off with that mystery. It's great. And then we jump right into the U.S. government try to capture him. I don't feel there's like a lot of build up to it. We're kind of flushed into mystery at the beginning, and then it's kind of burst wide open. There's no build up as far as us speculating or trying to get an understanding of anything. It's straight from mystery to bang. Now the U.S. military is after Bruce, and we have to kind of understand for ourselves, like we kind of make an inference on by ourselves what's going on with minimal information from the flashback scene, right? And then as we go, he's now suddenly back in the United States. He's trying to meet up with Elizabeth and kind of get the information from the database of his experiments to give to Mr. Blue. And then again, another scene where they find him. Once he's with Elizabeth, they find him. So I feel there's periods of just stagnant progression, and then it's just like, boom, action scenes, right? There's not a good intermix of plot progression and story development, and then before it gets to the big action scenes and the parts that kind of draw you in, right? It's kind of spotty, I feel like. As I've stated in previous episodes, though, I did enjoy the action scenes, and this movie was no different. Great action scenes. I loved the one at the fight scene at the university, especially now that Blonsky has been dosed with the serum, so he kind of stands somewhat of a chance initially and is holding his own. Even Ross says that. He's like, oh my gosh, he's doing it, right? So it was interesting to have that anticipation on, well, okay, let's see what Blonsky can do. Not in a way that I was rooting for him, but it's like with Hulk being this just menacing, overpowered being, it's like, what really could he do against them? And it was kind of interesting. And some people say very unbelievable, but with the aspect of the serum still in play here, it was very interesting to see that Blonsky kind of made some cool moves. Again, not that I was rooting for him, but it was like, okay, I see you, Blonsky. All right, I got you. And then, of course, the end battle when it was the culmination of everything this is built up to. Blonsky now in his Abomination form versus Hulk, who we've been trying to see unleashed and at his full potential the whole time. Love that scene. I love when he picks up he smashes the cop car, I believe the cop car, in half and uses it kind of like as a brass knuckles type weapon there. And then especially obviously the ending where he does his thunderclap, as well as he speaks for really the first time, does his Hulk smash. I think very good culmination of bringing the full capacity of the Hulk character together at the very end. To me, where it excelled in the action scenes, I feel it did lack in the comedy component. I feel that with these movies, the comedy is very important because like I've said, I'm a big action buff, and then bringing in the comedy is a good switch up at times as far as the dynamic and then kind of the focus of the film going from one aspect to the other, and definitely switching up the tone. And then I just felt in this movie, though, when it did attempt some comedy, it just didn't land for me. This movie had too of a serious tone consistently throughout for a superhero movie that's MCU and then Marvel in general, right? I did like all of the ending sequences, but one. The one I didn't like was when Hulk had finished kicking Abomination's ass. He fled afterward. I know he seemed briefly incapacitated, but my question is, how are they going to contain and transport Blonsky/Abomination, if he's still in that form? What happened? Did he revert back to his human form? Did he stay in the Abomination form? What happened? I mean, if Hulk just flees, what's stopping Abomination from kind of regathering himself there, taking a breath, and just unleashing hell again, right? So that was kind of like a loose end, I felt a little bit. I guess it's safe to assume that they were able to contain him, but I feel that he's just too powerful of a villain to just assume that he's contained like that, right? But yeah, that's just me. However, the ending sequences I did like, though, were one where Bruce actually tracks down the necklace that Elizabeth used to barter with and assist with their travels throughout the United States. Even though it played no significant part in the story, really, I do love when loose ends are tied off like that. So there's nothing to really ponder and kind of question moving forward. What happens if this, moves forward behind the scenes into the next movie or something? Just everything's tied off. Everything's kind of wrapped with a little bow. So second one, seeing Bruce focus his effort on harnessing the power of Hulk instead of fearing and suppressing it. I liked that dynamic. Obviously that ties right into what we're going to see in the Avengers. So I liked that little detail to just kind of for what we can end the movie on. And then they bring it right back and we see more of that when we come into further films. Now, here's what I've really been waiting on to talk about since the beginning of the episode, because at the very beginning, I said, I feel very strongly that there are actual connections here between the MCU and this movie, aside from one, the end credit scene, which I will still get to, but then also all the other phase 4, phase 5 future stuff that has recently come out and then projected to come out later. Stuff within the movie, I still feel there's a viable connection to make, and here's what I found throughout when I was watching the movie. So, the most apparent is obviously the last scene, like I said, the end credit scene where Tony Stark, Iron Man, walks into the bar, talks to Thaddeus Ross about starting the team of the Avengers, right? It goes directly off the end credit scene in Iron Man 2, where Fury states he only wants Tony as a consultant, so this is where we see it, right? We left off Tony, with Tony being a consultant to Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avenger Initiative. Now, in the next film, we see that occur. Boom. Number one, I like that. The dialogue between Thaddeus Ross and Blonsky throughout the movie about the Super Soldier Program, which is a direct tie-in to Captain America. Again, Captain America came out about 3 years, I think, after this, but still them being very detailed, very, very intricate with how these movies are intertwined. I did like that little detail, picking it up in the dialogue this time. So, going back to the opening credit scenes, even though I criticized the flashbacks and everything, there are little details and Easter eggs intertwined throughout there if you pause at certain scenes. For example, in the opening title scenes, Nick Fury, S.H.I.E.L.D. Command, Code Red, appears on a piece of typewriter paper, right? So right there, an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., S.H.I.E.L.D. being in the background of this still, they're always there. They know what's going on. Stark Industries schematics of the sonic cannons used to briefly immobilize Hulk in the university battle, right? Those were in the flashback scenes at the beginning, so kind of tying Stark into this, where you obviously see in the end credit scene, so he's there behind the scenes as well. When Thaddeus Ross takes off the tarp of the cryosync container that stores the serum that he ends up giving to Blonsky, you can see that the label reading Stark Industries right on it. Dr. Reinstein, which was Dr. Erskine's alias in Captain America the First Avenger. right? So again, tying it directly into Erskine, this being the super soldier program continuation that Thaddeus Ross is trying to keep going. And then lastly, it says Vita rays, which are the same rays that Erskine used to dispense the serum to Steve Rogers. So boom, right there, direct connections to the movie Captain America: The First Avenger. I love it. And then also future installment takeaways. These might be some things that I previously said. Abomination does finally return first in Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings, which came out in 2021. And then he does come back in She-Hulk, which came out in 2022. So they are trying to kind of revamp this Hulk movie and say, no, right? This movie does have a direct line to the other MCU titles, and it does work into the storyline. We're not just leaving these as loose ends, right? Let's bring them back in. Let's see what story we can make of these. I'm very excited to cover Abomination again when we get to those installments. As mentioned before, Samuel Stearns will return as the leader in Captain America: New World Order, coming out in May of 2024. Oh, one last thing that I noticed that was a connection that I said in the Iron Man 2 episode that I'd bring up now was at the end of Iron Man 2, when you're at the scene where Tony and Fury are talking at the desk and they're going over the assessment that Black Widow did of Tony. In the background on the screens, there's actually the news clip of the university fight scene of the Hulk on that screen behind Tony. Again, reiterating that this is Fury's big week, so everything going on in Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, and then Thor, which I will cover in the next episode, is all happening relatively at the same time. So again, just another little small detail that we actually saw in the movie prior, or that occurred in the movie prior, now coming to light and kind of coming together as far as all this being intertwined. After covering all that, I do want to do a quick summary of the good things I took away from this movie. I had more of a connection with the sentimental and emotional scenes at times, although there weren't many examples like when she's out looking for Bruce from the pizza shop scene. There were scenes like that where I could connect and kind of understand their relationship and feel that connection a little bit more. I did like that. I did dive deeper into Bruce's shoes in regard to feeling his pain and anguish about what transpired at the flashback scene at the beginning and the reasoning behind why he takes such caution. I was able to understand him a little bit better. It didn't seem as stale. It still was a little stale, and I can understand why people have that perception, but I felt diving into his shoes a little bit gave me a better perspective. I did enjoy the tie-ins to the MCU, although it's always said that there isn't as many tie-ins, and they're very loosely based. Like, I feel if you dive deep enough into it, you'll see them a little bit more clearly. If they aren't apparent and like in your face as much as like other films, I feel like making these references actually gets you more inclined to make the connections. I did enjoy the tie-ins to the MCU, even though they weren't as apparent and in your face as other installments. Even though you have to dive in to make these connections and these references, I feel it gives you a better appreciation for the detail they go into to make this all one big story, right? And I think this is a perfect example of that. Another thing, I do like following Blonsky's downward spiral and progression with the serum. Again, just another connection to the first Captain America movie. It's going off that consistency that it influences the person inside you. And I love there wasn't any confliction of that between the two movies. They kept that very consistent, and the storyline is in a good continuum. And of course, like all the other movies, I do like the action scenes. Again, I feel like the action scenes were what did it for me in this movie, because everything else was kind of questionable, but those did stick out to me. I love them. I want more Hulk. And then just to summarize what I didn't quite care for in the movie, starting with obviously the lack of comedy. When it's attempted, it just doesn't land. I can't get that switch up of tone from action and seriousness to a comedy skit or two, and then coming back to action later. I just don't feel that switch up, so I just feel like it's just like a one-dimensional movie. Liv Tyler's character, Elizabeth Ross, like, I love Liv Tyler. I love her in a lot of other movies. Great actress. Highly respect her, but I just felt we could have gotten a little better performance out of her, connect with her. I connected with her on minimal scenes, and only the ones that held the greatest buildup of emotion are the ones I really connected of. I'm very excited to see her back in New World Order and see if or how her character switches up and see what dynamic they give her moving forward. And then also, I didn't really care for the overall dark tone of the movie. It made it consistently too serious again, like I said before, which makes it hard to compare to other MCU installments. Again, speaking on about the Hulk, like they kept him like a little bit of a mystery at the beginning. It was more of a horror movie. He was more of a monster, dangerous, villainous at the beginning. I just felt that doesn't fit in quite with the MCU compared to other installments. So that just was too much of a switch up, I feel, for me in this video, until we finally see him be more sentimental, especially to Elizabeth Ross's character. We kind of get more on his side, I feel, at that point. And then again, at the very end, questions on how they contained Blonsky as Abomination after Hulk just up and left. I just feel that was kind of a loose end. It does get answered kind of as we move forward through the MCU way down the road. But in this moment, there was no confirmation for us. Okay, hey, they detained him, or he reverted back to his human form, or what happened here? It was just a question mark left at the end, and I hate loose ends. So that was just one final thing that I was kind of like, meh, about. So that really does it for my breakdown for The Incredible Hulk. I did have a greater appreciation for this film, even though it is still lower on my list. It didn't really move up any spots, but I did enjoy watching it this time around because I feel like I was able to dive into some of the characters' shoes a little bit more, understand their motives, understand their backgrounds, get a little bit more character development in there, things like that. But overall, I think it's an okay film, not great. I would still recommend it to everybody because now that we're getting into newer phase 4 is now over, but more phase 5 stuff where you're bringing back characters and everything is possible with the multiverse and everything, I feel it is still very important to watch this movie, so I still would recommend it to everybody. Now, doing a little bit of segue into our next movie, being Thor, the God of Thunder. It is the final solo movie before getting into the Avengers, so we're almost to the end of Phase 1. It's the final movie in Fury's big week. We see the God of Thunder as he proves to be unworthy of wielding his signature weapon Mjolnir, his hammer, as you will come to see, and he is shunned to Midgard, which is Earth. He must embark on this quest to regain the respect and trust of his fellow Asgardians, his people of his realm. And along the way, he meets a few characters that are very vital to him regaining the trust and regaining the worthiness of wielding the signature weapon of Thor. So I'm very excited to watch this movie again and dive deep into the details so I can break it down and bring you guys the best content I can in the next step in our journey. That concludes this episode of Mission MCU. You can always reach out to us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by searching Mission MCU, or you can email us at missionmcu@gmail.com. Be sure to tune in to the next episode where I break down Thor. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time on Mission MCU.